Welcome to the latest video interview from Undercurrent News. I'm Tom Seaman, the editorial director of Undercurrent. Today, I'm talking with Dan Aherne, CEO of New England Seafood International, known as Nessie in the industry. The company is specialised in processing chilled fish in four main species groups: cod and haddock, sea bass and bream, tuna, and then wild salmon. Its main customers are the major UK retailers. Last year, Alaska native corporation Sealaska acquired the majority of Nessie from founder Fred Stroyan and other shareholders. Stroyan still has a stake and remains on the board of the company. Well, that's a little intro, but maybe Dan, you could give us a bit more on yourself and on Nessie.
Hi, Tom. Nice to see you. So, yeah, I mean, you gave it a bit of an introduction there on sort of New England Seafood. We're a UK-based company. We have a business that is split broadly 80% retail, 20% food service, and we are supplying those species groups. Plus, we have a kind of speciality basket, actually, just to add to that, to the major UK supermarkets. And on our food service side, we're supplying some of the leading kind of sushi chains, especially some of the rising kind of food to go concepts, such as Sushi Daily, who are hosted in many of the retailers with kind of raw, ready to eat fish. As well as some of the high-end restaurant groups like the Ivy Group, with both raw, ready-to-eat and some ready-to-cook fish as well. So that's the kind of shape of the business. And business was founded by Fred in 1991. So we're 30 years old this year. We haven't really paused to celebrate that milestone amidst the other chaos, but that's come around quickly. It feels like yesterday we were celebrating our 25 years. And I've been fortunate to be on this journey now for roughly a little over half that time. So I joined the business in 2003. Back then I had mainly dark hair, but it didn't take long to turn grey in this industry. I joined Fred from Unilever. I'd done a few years at Birdseye Walls, where I'd had some exposure to our fish category at what was quite an exciting time. It was the onset of the Marine Stewardship Council. Much greater visibility around some of the challenges facing wild fish stocks. It was the early days really of aquaculture starting to come into the mainstream. So, you know, I was intrigued by the industry during my few years at Birdseye Walls. And when I got a phone call one day telling me about these two Scottish gents based in Wandsworth with what was called an exotic fish business then, supplying four of the leading UK supermarkets, growing at rapid rates of 30% per annum, and looking for someone to come and help them really in their dealings with the supermarkets, was I interested to have a discussion. I couldn't not go and meet Fred. And then in these sorts of businesses, it's about chemistry, it's about trust. And New England back then was a 17 million pound business, so we're about 10 times the size today, and it's just been a really exciting growth story. Many challenges along the way, as you would expect, but we've had a chance really to take the business through a number of really important phases of growth. We had to gear up our operations in the early 2000s. So we moved to Chessington in 2005. When you get into bigger, shinier factories, the rules of the game change. You have to upskill your team. The process was getting more complex. There was more value added, much more pre-packaged fish from the early days of everything being bulk fish counters. So the business underwent a huge amount of change. Really then, through the later sort of 2008 to 12, it was really figuring out directionally where did we want to go. And that's when we really decided that we were going to double down as a business on being real, seeking to be real experts in the things that we do. So not try to be a generalist and do everything, but to do the things that we do really, really well. And then really and that's what took us back into the food service market with the launch of Joy in 2012, which is our business to business food service brand focused on raw ready to eat. And then really in the last 5-6 years, building on those sort of really strong sourcing CSR operational foundations, we've been really moving much more into the realms of, category and consumer leadership, where we've been trying to connect much more visibly with actually what does the consumer want or need, if you like, and how can we look across the various category levers to best deliver that in partnership with our customers. And we've seen through those different phases, we've seen growth come at each of those stages, and we really are in this next phase now, doubling down on the consumer and category side of things, which no doubt we'll talk a bit more about in the next half an hour or so. And really, 30 years old, as I said, at 29 years of age, there came a point where our founder shareholders, which was really Fred, his business partner Andrew, and Joe Ropner, who'd been the founder shareholders of the business, had really rolled everything and invested continuously over the years to allow New England Seafood to have all the opportunities that it's had over the years, and to invest in our people and in the factories, in the growth, in building these supply chains. And really, with where we're heading, there came a point where actually the size of some of the investments and the bets that we're looking to make in this next phase just meant that it was right to bring in some new capital, and to actually allow the shareholders, if you like, that opportunity to, I guess, take some capital off the table for their 29 years of hard work. But we've managed to achieve, I think, a really great home for Nessie. I'm really proud of the transition of ownership to Sealaska. It's been seamless, really, and frankly, we've got the opportunity to continue very much on the journey that we've been on, but with ultimately greater backing in this next phase. But we've got great continuity, myself, my team, and it's great that Fred continues into the next phase as well. So we're at a really exciting moment. There's no shortage of challenge. There never has been in this industry. It's particularly acute at the moment, but we're taking a long-term view, and I've been here now for 18 years, but I've never been more excited to be part of this fantastic industry, and it's a real privilege to lead New England Seafood, Tom.
Well, thanks, Dan. Yeah, we'll get to chat more about the kind of the rationale for the Sealaska deal later, but I thought a good starting point would be to look at the challenges obviously the industry is going through, and talk about that with relation to Nessie. And the company reported just filed your 2020 numbers in the past couple of weeks with a very strong profit, but in UK processors have been hit with a multitude of challenges this year, with Brexit, the pandemic, and labour shortages, rising costs of energy, raw materials, and freight. It's kind of been very much a perfect storm, really. I wonder if you could give a summary of how these issues are impacting Nessie, and how you as a company are seeking to deal with them.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, it feels a long time ago now, 2020. We did, I think like many, our exposure, I guess our greater exposure to retail, that 80-20 split I spoke about through a global pandemic, where effectively people's buying options were largely confined to the retail channel. Undoubtedly those volumes were helpful, and we were through that able to do a fantastic job at servicing our customers. I was really proud of the way that the team and the business adapted and really pulled together to deliver those orders. And no doubt about it, that and a combination of all of the various operational investments that we've been making over recent years, and the work we've been doing on the category strategy, led to a good set of numbers. You have to work extremely hard in this industry to earn that, I think 2.5 pence in the pound that we managed to earn. So I'm definitely jealous of certain other industries, but the great thing about food is it's quite a resilient sector. So we were pleased with that performance. Look, the world's changed quite dramatically. I think all of that profit and some is currently rapidly going to be eroded by the sort of the wave of inflation that I think we and others in the industry see coming at us as a result of not just the raw material increases, which are now coming through in many sectors and species, but actually it's all of the other costs associated with doing business. And it's kind of unique, really. In my 18 years, we've always been able to mitigate or erode, some of the periodic cost pressures that would come in, because your efficiency and your productivity agenda has been motoring forward. But I think when you start to see, energy prices going up 50%, labor at sort of 10 to 12%, and then you see, packaging coming at, 7, 8, 9%, logistics costs going up at, 5+%. It's coming everywhere, and it's widely publicized in the press. I think in moments like this, our jobs, to keep cool heads, we have to ultimately believe in what we do and what we offer our consumers and our customers. And we have to look to ultimately plot a route through with our customers, and look at how how can we mitigate, what things can we do our side, and then ultimately what do we need to do with our customers to manage what's quite a testing situation? Because ultimately, one thing that is clear about this this dynamic and what's going on in the industry is that people need to eat, people need food, and there's a number of supply chains that are under quite a lot of pressure at the moment. And I think first and foremost, we've got to continue to make sure that we are supplying our customers to a really high level of service with great quality fish, particularly on the back of some of the macro trends and the national food strategy. I think fish does have an opportunity, and we want to make sure that we're in good health to service the opportunity. So yeah, look, it's testing times at the moment, but isn't it for most food businesses? And I think it's, we can't sit around and mope. We've got to keep our heads up, and ultimately, we have good trusting relationships with our customers, and together we have to plot a way through this.
Also, I guess it's not like this is fish specific, is it? I mean, the fish raw material is going up, but all of the other things affect every other kind of food supplier. So I guess, there's customers can't really use the sort of argument that, there'll be other stuff that could be substituted, because it's kind of it's effectively happening to everything, isn't it? So I suppose that must somehow make the conversations, easier is probably the wrong word to use, but at least there is that as well, isn't there? Where it's kind of
I think in any food type,
really.
Yeah, you're right, Tom. I mean, in any protein, you're always worried about the relative price, of fish to chicken to beef. I mean, fish isn't a cheap protein, so we've got to do a better job at earning the right, if you like, to be at the table. And I talk very often about the need for greater emotional connection. People do want to eat more fish. They want to eat more healthily. We've got to give them, great reasons and motivations to do that. Of course, we need to be as keen as we can be on value, because value is an important part of the equation. It's being widely talked about. I think most of the supermarket chief execs are managing expectations that the price of food is going to need to go up. But equally, the big four retailers are also very mindful of what happened, back at the sort of time of the credit crunch. And that was a period where the discounters grew their share rapidly, because perhaps they took a slightly different view on inflation. I think the difference between then and now is that, there is not unconstrained availability of labour, or, huge amounts of unutilized capacity, perhaps, in the way that there might have been then. So I think at the end of the day, everyone in these moments has to decide who are your partners, who do you trust to work with, and then we have to plot a way through. But we have to be really disciplined and sensible about how we do that. And above all, we and any supplier just needs to make sure that we're playing our part, that we can really look at ourselves and make sure that every pound of cost is really delivering the right value. It's delivering good value and the right value, and that's bound to mean it's some uncomfortable choices at moments in time. I think that's just inevitable for every business.
Yeah, I wondered if you could maybe give some sort of more specific details on the different impacts on the kind of the four main species groups that you you sell, because obviously some of them are coming from closer to the UK, others rely on freight, and I guess there's different kind of maybe dynamics for all of them, and I just wonder whether you could give a kind of a brief summary of how this perfect storm is impacting kind of each of these four groups.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite varied. I mean, we've seen, and if you take tuna as an example, which is a big area for us, we did see a lot of pressure on tuna raw material availability really start to hit us about 4 or 5 months ago, where a combination of Japanese demand through the pandemic, as people, went back to eating more as families, some of those traditional habits that had perhaps been waning, younger people out eating McDonald's instead of sushi while they were back at home having sushi with their families. And so there was a rise in tuna consumption, but at the same time there was a decline in some of the volumes being landed. Many of the boats, for COVID reasons as well, couldn't get out fishing. So you saw this kind of real kind of tightening of the market, which inevitably drove up raw material costs. So that's been an area that we've been facing into. Whitefish, I mean, you've spoken to many other far bigger players in the whitefish sector, so you'll understand the combination of quota cuts and demand is putting pressure on those prices, and we'd expect that to play out in sort of 2022 pricing dynamics. Exact levels to which we'll find out areas like Turkey and which is a big producer of sea bass and bream, of course, things like energy costs drive up the cost of production. But actually, some of these processes are still quite labor intensive as well. And what's really interesting is the more you understand about the labor dynamics, it's not just the UK, it's not just other sort of Western developed countries. Actually, there's many other countries in all sorts of, socio-economic kind of spheres who are effectively all reporting similar challenges, that actually just big parts of the labor force have effectively stepped away. Now, whether that's for now, whether they come back into the labor markets, I guess remains to be seen. But those dynamics in an area like sea bass processing would put pressure on the cost. So it's kind of in multiple areas. There's not too many areas at the moment where we're seeing.
Yeah, there's no relief really, is there? There's usually been, I'd say, there's usually obviously been some area where there's been some relief, but it doesn't seem like that's the case at all at the minute.
That's usually been the dynamic, where you might get pressure on one or two of the species, and then you can get another coming back. The wild salmon was despite some relatively good catches this season, pricing really didn't ease because there's just been a really insatiable demand for high quality fish in the US market, and some of the supply chains that might previously have kept some downward pressure on some of these more premium raw materials, like the material that comes out of the Far East. Those just-in-time supply chains, the people that used to operate on 4 weeks of inventory and keep the pipeline coming, they can't rely on those supply chains anymore. And indeed, I think many customers are questioning, do we want to have supply chains that are wholly dependent on long chains like that? Because models that were seamless for a period of, a decade plus have been kind of really thrown into question. And the carnage of which containers are where, and sort of how the global shipping industry is kind of in some places almost ground to a halt is quite frightening and disconcerting if you're reliant upon continuous supply of food for your customers. Yeah.
It's I guess you're in a good position to not be too dependent on this kind of stuff. The reprocessing industry in Asia, and which has obviously been really impacted by that.
We're not directly dependent, but what you find is even container movements, the right containers and being in the right ship, things like the -60, we haven't been without some impact there, but fortunately we have managed to stay in supply thus far. So
yeah, and you obviously built up a good inventory position, which is shown in the accounts, wasn't it? That you obviously went into 2021 with a lot more inventory than you would normally have, from what I read.
We did, and that was very deliberate, based on Brexit and some of the uncertainties. And I think if there's one area where we and our owners are taking the view, it's that actually, we've got many other challenges to circumnavigate together, some of these inflationary pressures, but we want to be able to give a very clear commitment to our customers. And also, if you're carrying that cost, you have to make sure you've got products in your factories that we will keep them absolutely in supply of fish. It sounds like the most basic of promises, but all the things that perhaps we and others have taken for granted over the last decade, you can no longer take for granted, given the number of shocks to the system that are kind of going on at the moment. So,
it seems like things are a bit less about price and more about just having the raw material, isn't it? It's kind of about securing the fish, and and the price will be what it will be to some extent. And so one of my Pollock contacts put it to me. It was quite a kind of interesting point, that it's just more about actually, like, if you haven't got, you might secure a contract at a good price, but if you don't get the fish, it doesn't really matter, does it? It's kind of much more about securing that raw material. Well, despite all these issues, retail sales have been very strong in the pandemic period. Obviously now food service is back, and I imagine that food service side of your business is benefiting from that. But so maybe you can tell us a bit about what Nessie's doing to kind of capitalise on this climate despite these challenges.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, our food service business, we're not a generic sort of fish merchant, if you like. So we're not one of these businesses that's sort of supplying a bit of multiple species to lots and lots of food service customers. We tend to focus quite deep with a core kind of customer base, really heavily around our raw ready-to-eat proposition, but increasingly we are finding customers that share our values and are much more interested in knowing a lot more about the supply chains that their fish is sourced through, the CSR credentials, and all of that important work that we've been doing in Nessie for the last 15, 20 years, who are prepared to ultimately reflect that in the value that they pay for the fish. Whereas historically, a big part of this sector was just purely, quite traded, to be honest. It was almost the daily haggle on the phone in the morning. So we also are selling some ready to cook fish to kind of key customers that are showing that greater level of interest. One thing I would say about the food service sector is I think it was incredibly resilient through the pandemic. The number of our customers, of course, when the market got shut down very suddenly in March, we saw a big drop off. We probably overnight lost 85% of the sale. But actually, within a period of 4 to 6 weeks, and certainly by the time lockdown 2 came, the way that many of those businesses had galvanized around their delivery models, they're using the likes of Deliveroo, how they'd re-engineered some of their businesses was really impressive. Concepts like Sticks and Sushi, restaurant chains like Sticks and Sushi were incredible. The amount of volume that they were doing out of their restaurants, like the one on the King's Road, without the restaurant actually being open. It was phenomenal. So actually, as the pandemic went on, we found that even though the sector wasn't fully open, we were still sort of achieving probably 60-65% of the pre-pandemic sale. Obviously, since things have opened up, there's been a pretty voracious appetite from consumers to get back out and just experience eating out again, and that's been good for the business. But I mean, our strategy hasn't fundamentally changed. We're just trying to work really in a very deep and mindful way with these key customers who ultimately we feel there's a direction of travel, and a number of those customers are currently kind of in expansion mode. In some cases internationally. So with our new ownership as well, it's sort of giving us opportunities to think about how can we service customers, both sides of the Atlantic, who buy in, if you like, to the value system and potentially some common sources as well that allow them to really promote their brand on the back of some of the product that we're able to offer them. So yeah, it's been good to see the industry kind of re-emerge, and we obviously had to support a number of those customers from a cash point of view through some quite difficult moments. But I think in moments like this also you kind of on all sides you learn who your friends are, don't you, as well?
Yeah. Have you seen most of your customer base survive the pandemic, or have you had customers go under? So I've been surprised by how few restaurants that I'm aware of, about all the good ones are still there, really, as far as I can see.
Yeah, and I think that's testimony to that point I made around sort of the adaptability and resilience, and also, I think you have to take your hat off to our government. There might be many areas where you might criticise, but I think the furlough and the level of support, I mean, it was kind of, it was very bold. And definitely. Ironically, probably, Tom, what's happened is a number of businesses that perhaps actually aren't viable in the long term have been kept going, and it might still be another 3, 6, 9 months before you see the true fallout. However, certainly, good businesses with fundamentally good business models have been able to keep going and actually adapt and come out, I suspect, very strongly.
Yeah, and on the have you seen, since food services has come back, have you seen retail drop off, or has it continued to to stay at a sort of similar level?
No, we've definitely seen a drop in retail as people have had more choices as to where to ultimately consume their calories. So going into the pandemic, I was very pleased with our 80-20 split of retail to food service. Coming out, I wish it was more 50-50.
Right.
But yeah, people, I think, especially through the summer, people had I think the idyll of the family meal all sat around the table had. I don't know about your own experience, but probably slightly worn off. So I think any excuse people did have to get out, and probably people had saved a few quid as well through the pandemic. So I think the food service market has probably enjoyed some of that spend flowing its way.
Then, yeah, on the retail side, like to maybe you could say a bit about what you're doing on the private label side, and then we could talk a bit about the brands, the Fish Said Fred and Leap development. Is there anything to say on the private label side first, as to what your innovative things that you're doing?
I mean, look, I think at our core, New England Seafood is and remains a private label business. I mean, the majority of our sale is still through our customers' brands, and we kind of take that really seriously. I mean, when we supply, into one of our customers' brands, ultimately the way that we talk about it in our business is that we're being trusted with as custodians of that brand, and we have a real responsibility to nurture and look after that brand. Our whole focus remains really consistent. It's this category vision of showing people how to enjoy our fish every day, and that we've done some really good work on our category vision. We've really segmented where we think the scale of opportunity is in the category and the key pillars that will drive it. And by far, number one is our ability to inspire and educate shoppers. And the inspiration and the education need to both be done, because if you just educate, you can't lecture consumers. I mean, people inherently know the benefits of eating seafood, but what they need is that emotional connection and that inspiration, that moment of inspiration that gives them either the confidence or the fresh idea or the reason to buy fish twice a week instead of once a week, or whatever that may be. So a lot of the work we're doing with our customers at the moment actually is less around product. There is product work going on. It's much more around how do we change the way that the shopper ultimately feels and thinks when they're at the point of purchase. And that point of purchase is obviously both physical in store, but it's also online. And in many ways, digital, although it's a smaller part of the sale, it's been a rapidly growing part of the sale through the pandemic. But digital ultimately gives you the ability to make one change, and then you've got an immediate rollout, haven't you? Doing something in 1,000 stores is physically, it's much more expensive, and it takes longer to implement. But we're looking at some exciting projects in terms of just how fish is laid out, how it's communicated. And we think ultimately that these are going to be the sorts of things that help inspire greater consumption in our business, and that will benefit the whole category, whether it's private label or brand.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, well, just to chat a little bit about the the brands you're building up. I saw you got there's two new products in Tesco under the Fish Said Fred brand. I think one is a bream product and one's a cod product. Wonder if you could tell us a bit about how that's going, and then what's coming next with that brand.
Yeah, so Fish Said Fred, the whole thinking around Fish Said Fred is we're really trying to make fish more accessible in that center of category space. It's fascinating getting out and talking to consumers and listening to how people talk about the fish category. They see it as quite an austere, quite a serious category, quite sort of library-like. And what we've really tried to do with Fish Said Fred is to address that center of category, that family occasion as well, and take some of the angst and fear out of cooking and preparing fish. So, we want decent portion sizes. We want accessible cuts. We want to take some of the fear out of it. But actually, it's a lot of what we're putting around Fish Said Fred. So, we've majored on the kind of recipe ideas and suggestions on our digital platform. We're trying to have some playful dialogue with consumers, just to promote them in store with some of the banners and things you'll see. It's this idea that the answer to everything is Fish Said Fred. So we're trying to capture people when they're in that moment of, well, what shall I have for dinner? We've done a sponsorship deal with Steph's Packed Lunch on Channel 4, where we've been sponsoring that through over the last sort of 4 weeks, and I think that runs for a full quarter, where we've got a lot of our core audience are watching Steph's Packed Lunch, and again we're just trying to make sure that fish is featured once a week on that program, and we're just trying to provoke people and promote this idea that fish doesn't need to be scary. It can be very accessible. So we've captured I think the imagination of some of our customers on that journey so far, and our plans are really just to build gradually, but ultimately what we're saying to our customers is that the more support and distribution that they're able to put behind Fish Said Fred, the more we can prepare to invest as well above the line to really hopefully start to change how people think and feel about fish. That's really what we're setting out to do.
Okay, so is there going to be more products coming in Tesco, or is it going to be these two for now?
Yeah, so we've got we have a sea bass product. I think there's actually 4 products in Tesco.
Right.
There's
I only saw 2 online. Maybe it's some available just in store.
Yeah, so we have a whole sea bass and a whole bream, and then we have a really delicious cod fillet. We have a sea bass. We have a large sea bass fillet, but I think the other value added product we have in Tesco is a topped sea bass in a sort of foil tray recipe. So we're looking at a number of products development and innovation. But actually, one of the things that we've been saying to our customers, actually fundamentally, this isn't about needing lots of multi-syllable recipes here. This is actually about how we stimulate people just to be thinking about fish and giving that confidence. The best piece of fish is usually a bit of salt and pepper and just deliciously cooked. But there's some real barriers. People have this kind of fear or imagination that it's way harder than it is. And that's a lot of what we're trying to break down. And brands don't need to be functionally that new or different, but what they can do is they can build in a level of emotional connection and awareness that can transform the overall consumer experience, and that then benefits the entire category. Of course, we're keen to promote fish said fed, but actually, the overarching goal is to get more people eating more fish more often, and that's the mission that we're on.
Yeah, well, thanks, Dan. Then on Leap, is there anything to report on the progress of that in terms of how that brand's rolling out?
Yeah, so I mean, Leap is obviously occupies that premium space where we really are championing the very best of wild, sustainably caught fish. So the belief, it's a challenger brand. The belief is that the best fish swim free. Now, obviously, New England's, we're very pro aquaculture as a business. We have a huge proportion of our business in farm fish, and we know that farm fish is essential to feeding future generations. But what we're really trying to do is to draw that distinction that, you know, we know the pressure on wild catch resource. We know there's a finite level to which we can sustainably harvest seafood, and I think we have a responsibility as an industry to make sure that we harvest fish sustainably in the right way, in an ethical way, but that actually when we pull the fish out of the sea, we're really taking care of the condition in which it's pulled out of the sea. And then, you know, we have a responsibility through how we maximize the value of the entire carcass to get the greatest value for what's a really precious resource. And what we're trying to do with Leap ultimately is really build, again, that emotional connection into the very best cod loin, or, you know, the chunky tuna steak, or the most amazing, you know, authentic, you know, Canadian wild smoked Alaskan salmon. And, you know, it's early days still with Leap, as it is with Fish So Fred. But what we're seeing is that, you know, the brand is pulling in really premium shoppers. It's encouraging them to spend more. These are high value shoppers for our customers, and it's got some really nice repeat rates. So we're at a stage where we're working on the background on some really, I think, you know, groundbreaking creative to tell that story. And this is really definitely a long-term bet that we're making as a group. We do think that Leap could travel well beyond these shores, because we think the truth is a universal one. We think it could resonate really well as well with US customers. So that's something we're looking at. But fundamentally, we've got a load of untapped growth opportunity here in the UK. And you know, through 2022, what you'll see us start to put our heads above the line with Leap, just as we have done recently with Fish Said Fred on Steph's Kitchen. But you'll have to watch this space. But there's some excellent creative that we're working on at the moment, and we're really excited to be able to share that in 2022.
Interesting. I guess that's one. Well, it brings me kind of nicely to the next question in terms of you know, with Sealaska taking a majority stake in the business, and how that ownership shift has changed things. It sounds like they're really putting some, you know, some money behind marketing, basically. Which is that the case? That's kind of one thing that's changed.
Yeah, I mean, we were already starting to do that,
right?
You know, but at the end of the day, what we've got huge continuity. Effectively, what Sealaska is doing is backing us to continue on the plan. But absolutely, you know, there is a long-term view to how we build a consumer-led global seafood business. That's the vision that we have, and you know, we were very clear on that was the Nessie vision. You know, prior to teaming up with Sealaska, but that was also very much Sealaska's vision of the sort of seafood division that it wanted to build within its group. So there was kind of a really natural fit. I mean, you know, our industry as a whole is very resource focused. It's quite production led. And, you know, for all very understandable reasons. However, you know, what our industry ultimately has to do, and I think most people recognize this, we've got to do a better job at reaching out and appealing to and communicating with the consumers that we serve. And so we're really trying to come at this from the other way. But of course, you don't do that unless you've got brilliant foundations, brilliant sources. And so New England Seafood has spent 30 years building up, you know, really strong supply chains all around the world. Sealaska is committed to and helps us to continue to do that. You know, as you've seen with the recent Iceland news that we'll talk about in a moment, no doubt. But actually, what we really want to do is to make sure that we're investing in building a more complete and wholesome narrative, if you like, or relationship with the consumer. And brands is one way of doing that. It's not the only way, you know, all the category investment that we're putting in, but ultimately brands are a way to build emotional connection and a relationship in areas that are poorly understood, where there's a lack of confidence in some areas, and you know, there's a lack of knowledge as well. So I think it's great to have an owner that takes that long-term view, because you don't achieve consumer change overnight. You have to be patient, you have to play the long game, and you have to be disciplined and stay the course. When you have an established brand, of course, you can put your foot on the gas, you can chuck, you know, 5 to 10 million into advertising, you can see a pretty fast return sometimes on that. But when you're building something from ground up, you've got to take a long-term view, and it's great that we've got an owner that's supportive of us doing that.
Yeah, they're obviously taking a long-term view on the downstream side, but then, as you mentioned, also on the upstream side with these investments in these two. So am I correct to say they're two kind of linked Icelandic companies, or are they two separate entities entirely?
As legally they're separate entities, but yeah, they've got a close relationship.
Right.
Because Ag Seafood, which is the processing business, produces the majority of its goods for Ismar. So Ismar has really been heavily the marketing arm for Ag Seafood. So it really just keeps the team, if you like, very much together and moving in a common direction. And Ismar has been focused much more on actually the selling and the marketing side of the business, which, you know, in Iceland, as I'm sure you realise, typically that does happen through trading companies. A lot of the big catching and processing businesses, if you like, sell their product through different routes to market, and Ismar is one of those routes, and has done an excellent job since it was founded. In fact, I think Gunnar set Ismar up in the same year that I joined New England Seafood. So right. We go back a long way, and we've worked with them over the last 15, 20 years to develop various routes to market, but they have a really strong business as well into North America. So it's just a really good fit. But yes, it does get us closer to the industry, closer to the ground. And ultimately moving forward, it's about how do we connect ultimately the consumer need states and demands, if you like, with the capabilities at source, both in terms of access to raw material, but then also the processing capabilities. Because often it's how we make those early stages of processing, those choices we make there, that can shape the product in the right way for the consumer occasion.
And does it also give you a potential route to market into the US then, if they've got strong sales into the US, as well as obviously Sealaska as well? Yeah,
definitely. So you know, as we look to expand in that area, it's, you know, it's really helpful to have some really strong established customer relationships, and you know, with people who are interested to talk more about the wider offer that we can provide. So yeah, that's definitely going to be a benefit.
Yeah, so the rationale is really about securing that control over, obviously they're a supplier, they were a supplier of yours, but this will mean that you can just have much more say on what happens at that sort of point of, you know, the origin, basically.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately the philosophy that when you team up with like-minded people who share your values and have a passion for growth, that's really the key thing. You need energy. there's never enough hours in the day. There's always challenges coming out. The great thing about New England Seafood over the years is we've assembled a team that really buys into a common vision. It sounds really obvious, doesn't it? But it's not always the case in businesses. But when everyone's, pulling in the same direction, motivated by the vision, and you've got energy around you, you tend to be able to move faster. And I think, what this tie up with Ismar and Ag gives us, it brings in two really high quality leaders into our team who have a really, common shared vision of where they want to take their businesses. And ultimately, I think together we can strengthen each other and ultimately get there faster, which is what it's all about.
Well, yeah, thanks, Dan. So is Sealaska also on the lookout for more, M&A to bolster Nessie's supply chain like this, or was this an opportunistic one that presented itself, or is it something that you're looking to do more of, in your different sort of, the different species groups you're sourcing from?
No, definitely. I mean, this is going to be an ongoing. We don't need to do anything. We don't make commitments to. We're not on any public markets, etc. So it's not like we have an agenda that we've said we're going to do this. Therefore, we just deploy X capital into new businesses. That's very much not the case. But the fact is that we've got a clear vision. We've got a clear plan as to where we want to get to, and where we identify moves that can help us to go in that direction, then we've got the support and the resources to be able to make some of those moves where they make sense. And those can be moves which help us in that consumer and category connection I've talked about, or they can be moves that actually help underpin that in the raw material or operational side of the business. So again, we're not wedded to investments in one part of the value chain or another. It's about piecing the whole thing together to make sure that we've got a balanced business.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and maybe if you could give any other insights on the plans to develop Nessie in 2022, such as investments in processing plants, new equipment, new products. Anything specific you can talk about on that you're looking to do next year or now even?
Well, look, we've had a lot of investment in both our operations actually to drive productivity and efficiency, and I think that agenda just gets sharpened, especially with the current squeeze on both availability and obviously the cost of labour. So we've got to make sure that we are keeping abreast of and looking at all the possible opportunities for capital investment where it can help us to ultimately either increase yields on processing or to improve our throughputs and drive our productivity. We've got a couple of capital projects that we're looking at which would move us in that direction around both equipment and space. The more you want to automate, the more space you need. Robotics are it's a real fag packet rule. I don't profess to be an expert on this, but what my operations team would tell me is it's roughly a two to one kind of space equation, at least, if you want to go a little bit more automated in certain areas. And that makes complete sense as well from a safety point of view. So, we are looking at how we can expand our physical space to enable the future. Again, that's a long-term play that we're looking at that would kind of secure the footprint for the next kind of 10 plus years. So, when we're able to share something in that front, we will. But beyond that, it's looking at, every area of our business, every process, how can we improve it? And, where capital makes sense as part of that journey, then again, we would be in a relatively strong position to be able to make those investments as long as those, marry up with our customer commitments and long-term planning.
I guess that would expanding the footprint would have to be in Grimsby, right? Because can't imagine there's space to expand in Chessington, or do you have space to expand there too?
No, we're a little bit landlocked in Chessington. We've got the railway line that goes at the back, but increasingly we've been focusing Chessington really on the specialist, more technically kind of challenging raw materials like tuna. We've got a real expert team. Really proud of the job that the Chessington team have been doing over the last couple of years to improve our processes. All of our raw ready to eat fish comes out of Chessington. We do a really top tier, hand pin boned, hand filleted, raw, ready to eat salmon speck, for example, and those sorts of things which don't require high levels of automation. There is automation in Chessington on things like our portioning and grading, where we've invested quite significantly. But actually, some of the processes is actually about the care and attention as well. And Chessington tends to lean more in that direction. And yes, the space that we have, we bought additional land when we made our investment in Grimsby at the end of 2016. So we were thinking ahead even at that time, and there's one or two other things we're looking at which could further enhance our kind of footprint, which we hope to bring to fruition in the next kind of 6 months.
Interesting. What other kind of acquisition opportunities you mean?
They may be, Tom.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we would do. It would be more like to be organic, but it may be around buildings and stuff. Yeah.
Sure. Right. Okay. Well, yeah. More. It'd be good to finish off with your views on just how you see 2022 playing out for the seafood sector generally, because there's all these kind of challenges which we've covered in this interview, but also a lot of opportunities as well. So I just it's a bit of a crystal ball question, but I thought it'd be fun just to get your opinion on what sort of year you think 2022 is going to be for the industry generally.
I think it's going to be quite a transitionary year. I think there's going to be a fair few shocks in 2022 as everybody tries to pick their way through what's quite a difficult kind of set of circumstances. But I think in these moments, so I think it'll be quite volatile in places. It won't be predictable. It won't be steady state, and it won't be quiet. That's for sure. But actually, I think fish, if you take a more macro view, I think it's at quite a pivotal moment, because on the one hand, there is a global drive and trend towards ultimately recognizing some of the climate challenge as well, to probably a move to lower the amount of meat consumption. Just the National Food Strategy from the Dimbleby report, is talking about sort of 30+% recommendations of meat reduction over the next kind of 15, 20 years. But that, on the one hand, you would think, well, what an opportunity for fish, and that it's true to say that, but it certainly doesn't guarantee success for fish, because we have a strong but very vocal minority who will actively lobby against our industry. And I think, and clearly programs like Seaspiracy, are quite provocative. Some truth, but we know a lot of untruth and quite a lot of misleading fact within that. But I think therefore the industry has a real responsibility on two fronts. We've got to have a good, really strong, joined up voice that promotes our industry in the right way. We've got to continue to take on the big challenges in sustainability, some of that social, ethical, and then the environmental agenda within the industry. So we've got to play our part there. But above all, we have to continue this focus of ultimately making fish more relevant to consumers in their ever-changing lifestyles. And we have to make sure that when people are considering reducing their meat consumption, that they're happy to consider it in equal measure increasing their fish consumption, because not only because they understand the health benefits, but because they've got a broader repertoire. They know what to do with it. They can feel good about it. We've got to help them understand the significantly lower carbon impact that fish has when it's grown or farmed versus meat, because the per capita consumptions remain stubbornly low in many developed countries. The UK is still hovering around 21 kilos a year, which is really low when you take countries like Portugal at 70 kilos. The US is still at kind of 16 pounds of seafood a year, which is kind of about 16-17% of the level of poultry. So there's real upside if we get after it, but I don't think we can assume that it's guaranteed upside. We've actually got to earn the right to make it into more baskets. So I think that's the kind of motivating, exciting part. In the meantime, we've just got to pick our way through some of the chaos and madness that's kind of ensuing at the moment. But these things have a habit of ultimately working their way through, because that's what markets do, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. And I presume we've spoken about it, but I guess you see that there'll be more consolidation coming too, which, Nessie is now kind of part of, because it seems inevitable for me in the sector.
Yeah, I think there'll be more. I think there will be, because to deal with some of the big challenges, if you really want to make a difference on things like, plastics, on environment, everyone can do the smallest company can do their own little bit, but some of the investments, I think, that are really required to change the game, ultimately are massively help when there's a level of scale. I mean, we constantly feel that pressure. Even if you look at we've got the most amazing CSR team. We're pushing on so many different areas, and we get a lot of great feedback from our customers, from independent parties. We were really pleased to win the MSC Retail Supplier of the Year again last week. I think that's the third year in 4, and that's a result of all the work that it's not just New England, it's the work we do with our customers, but it's all the amazing support we have from our suppliers and the work we do with them. But that's all resource and cost. And ultimately, when you look at all of that, it's a really important part of our proposition, but ultimately it requires scale and volume to pay for it. And I think you will, therefore, in all these areas, to make the hard yards requires real investment. And I think that does then take scale. So I think that's ultimately going to be one of the driving forces behind the continued consolidation in our industry.
Well, thanks, Dan. That was a fascinating chat. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us. Cheers. Take care. Okay.
Thank you, Tom.
Bye.